Hello and welcome to Practical Christian Lessons, and we are going to be discussing something a little different today. Let's get into it. So you'll notice I'm kind of laid back here. I'm not looking at my screen. I don't have my glasses on. It's going to be a little bit more relaxed. This is something that's just on my heart and I think is important to talk about, and that is the importance of theological unity. Now, when I say theological unity, I'm kind of using that broadly. I also mean unity in general. This is, in my mind, specifically about things like, say, the Reformed Arminian debate, which I have weighed in on. I believe, hopefully, in a respectfully way. Um, and those are some of my older videos, but I think there are important aspects to having unity in the body of Christ today across traditions that we're kind of missing. One is discussing respectfully. I don't think that's a unknown thing, especially with the presence of the internet. Gavin Ortland has written a book on how to disagree well. I recommend that book, and going and checking that out. That's something we all need to do, and something we all need reminded to do better at times, myself included. I am more concerned with the issues of triage, which Gavin Ortland has also written a book on. With triage, it's sort of ranking our list of issues and how important they are. And often I see people get this very wrong. Something that matters a lot is soteriology, the Arminian Reform debate, but a lot of people want to make this like a tier 1 issue. You will be damned if you get this wrong, or at the very least they act as if that's true. They condemn each other over it, when historically, from the early church to today, both those things have generally been allowed to exist in tension. Now, there's plenty of discussion on how the Reformed have maybe developed and gone a bit further than, say, Augustine or others in the past. That's a different discussion. But a lot of the roots of what we hold to is found in the early church. Specifically, Arminianism tends to be more found in the Greek fathers. Just read John Chrysostom's homilies on Romans, his homilies on Ephesians, Galatians, all of them. He very clearly has a very Arminian leaning. And then on the Latin side, on the West, you generally have what we now come to call a more Reformed, or, well, one of the two Lutheran views. There's two Lutheran views, and they're kind of like a happy middle between the Reformed and the Arminian stance. And they're a good synthesis of both those things. But generally, these two extreme ends have been allowed to exist together in tension within the church. And that's something we kind of have lost grip on. This is something a lot of people I've talked to just don't seem to grasp, is how can we allow these things to exist in tension? One's clearly wrong. Well, whether or not one's wrong, which, of course, someone's wrong and someone's right, that's how truth works. The church has allowed these things to exist together in tension for a reason. And I do trust the wisdom of the ancient church of having allowed these things of, hey, this is the debates we're having. We're going to allow both these debates to exist and have these differences of opinion. We're supposed to be able to do that. We're supposed to have unity in essentials and then charity in the non-essentials. And soteriology does matter, but the exact issue of Arminianism versus predestination is not an essential of the faith, which we know because the early church wasn't all one side or the other. There were a vast variety of views. The church today isn't like that. You have the Anglican church that generally allows this existence of Reformed views on one end, all the way to Arminian views on the other end. And they have people who are maybe more Lutheran on their soteriology. Lutherans have multiple views. They've had very staunch fights, as I discussed with briefly as part of my longer discussion with my friend Adam on Lutheran and Methodist predestination, which you can go in the lives on our channel and see that if you're interested. I would recommend it. It's very entertaining. And it was a truly great conversation. But we've got to learn to accept allowance of these, especially, and this is the most important part I think of this video, especially when we have bigger battles to fight. Something a lot of people in the Reformed and Arminian world aren't aware of is that once upon a time we held hands in battle. When the Socinians were large, this is a Trinitarian heresy, basically. They don't affirm the divinity and the Christ. It's its own thing. Look up Socinianism. When that was very big and popular, Arminians and Reformed worked together to battle Socinianism. We joined hands and said, this is far more dangerous. This is a tier 1 issue. Our issue is down here. Theirs is up here. And we have this bad habit of letting lots of issues, not just predestination, but at least in America, we tend to fight over every single little thing. That's one of the most damaging things to our witness to the world, is our lack of unity. We should be able to have unity, and many do have unity. I know many Christians who are able to have unity despite these differences, despite denominational differences. Though we don't have institutional unity, we have unity in working together. We have open tables. We share in our faith. We share in prayer. These things that are signs of unity, and those are powerful witnesses when they are around. But then when we have people fighting tooth and nail over things that aren't essentials of the faith, there are so many people on the outside who will look in and say, oh, I'm not interested in that. I don't even know if their faith is true, and yet they're in here fighting each other tooth and nail. Why would I even want to get involved in that if I'm not even convinced that their religion is true in the first place? That's a thing that happens constantly. And that's really bad. So we need to learn how to work through those differences. And I just have a few tips for this. One, of course, is learning how to rank the issues. I recommend Gavin Orton's book, of course, but generally, if it's a salvation issue, tier 1. That is number 1. If it's threatening people's salvation, like you can't really dismiss that. This is tier 1. This is going to be things like your Trinitarian thought. How one is saved is a very important discussion. All sorts of things can fall into this. Tier 2 and tier 3, some people add a tier 4. I generally hold tier 2 and 3. Tier 2 is things that maybe will like break an institutional unity. Say the infant baptism versus credo baptism, pedo baptism versus credo baptism. I don't expect people to simply be able to be in one institution if they disagree on such a fundamental thing. I do know places that do it, and incredible respect to them that do. But for a lot of people, this falls into a tier 2 issue of where I'm not going to say you're outside of salvation. I'm not going to condemn you, but I will not be able to have unity with you on many things because of this difference. And I know some people who overlook that difference. Different camps do different things. And then tier 3 is going to be the things that we can just agree to disagree on, or disagree and have and be fine having many discussions on, which we should be able to do with each of these issues. But tier 3 is like things like, I'm trying to think of something that someone won't try and argue is in one of these other tiers. I'd say predestination. Some people might argue it's a bit more important. This could be anything from what color of carpet we should have versus, and sadly I know places that have split over stuff like that, all the way to say, like, how is it we operate a church? Where is the liturgy in the service? I know some Methodist churches that say have communion at the start of their service, and some that do it in the middle, and some that do it in the end. That'd be like a tier 3 issue of, we can have plenty of disagreements on this and not divide over. The most important thing in handling these discussions is, one, being honest where our disagreements are, not trying to water them down and make it seem like they aren't as big as they are. Be honest about differences and how big they are and what the differences are. If you aren't honest, you're not going to get past the disagreement as much as you try to water it down, because it will always be there. Number 2 is remembering passages like Galatians 5:20 through 26 and how we are supposed to treat each other in these differences. Now, if it's like a tier 1 issue and someone's salvation is on the line, there is, of course, steps to take. Paul and others set this example. Your corrections do get more harsh the more serious an issue is and the longer it goes on. You start with gentleness, like Paul does in 1 Corinthians. And there's still certainly plenty of bite to 1 Corinthians, but he's a very gentle tone throughout it. And he says, when I come, this tone will not be the same if this isn't fixed. I do not want to come and have to crack the whip, as it were. But if you don't fix these things, this will not be a pleasant visit. And plenty of other places where we see examples of very kind, very tender care, and then very stern rebukes and very harsh rebukes. This is part of how the Christian life is to work. And this takes discernment. It also takes talking to each other and talking to your pastors and mentors. And you should have mentors if you don't. And that's another important thing in this entire discussion, is we do need to be talking with those who are our spiritual shepherds and our spiritual fathers and mothers, and having these people who can guide us, from priest to small group leaders to care ministry providers. At least that's the thing at my church. We have people who handle Our church is so big, we have people who help handle the care ministry. Of course, pastors go out, they make visits, but so do a lot of the laity. And we have this sort of tiered structure of it. Whoever it is that's coming out to talk to you, or that you're going to talk to, we need to be discussing these things with them. And then the last and most important note is being ready to can have long periods of disagreement without breaking unity over, and being willing to set it aside for a time. Being willing to agree to disagree. Even you can do that while still continuing to have discussions about it. I know people who have had years of discussion between just two people on infant and credo baptism, on whether or not they should be baptizing babies. They've been discussing it for years and are still close friends, and though they may not necessarily be in the same church, they are not breaking their friendship, and they are continuing that discussion in a respectful way. Not that, of course, it doesn't get heated at times, but how many of us today can do that? How many of us today can have a discussion that goes on for longer than a week of disagreement and not get overly heated and move into these wrong territories, or just get so frustrated we just abandon the conversation entirely? That is a skill. It's a skill you have to build up, but it's a skill, and it's something we all need to be able to learn to do, myself included. This is something I have not perfected by any means. When a conversation goes on over a very long period of time of disagreement, I do get frustrated with it, and at some point do kind of just throw my hands up and say, I'm tired of having this conversation. Now, there's times where it's like you're talking in circles, or someone's failing to grasp a point, like there's just no way the conversation is going forward, and that can be a important part, which I'll have another point on, of like, at some point you either need to leave the discussion and bring someone else in to have it move forward, or you do maybe need to put it aside because you're not getting anywhere. And then there's going to be times where your conversation will be moving forward, learning how to cultivate a conversation and go forward. And this is an important part. This is something, maybe if you read the comments on a lot of my videos, whether that's shorts or my other short form content elsewhere online, the comment sections here on my long form videos, sometimes you'll notice, and I've used this phrase, that someone's reading to respond rather than reading to understand. When you're reading to understand it, both these things, the title says it all, you are reading hoping to understand what is being said, and you're genuinely trying to grasp what the other person is saying. You're not interested, at least when you're listening, in responding to it, in refuting it, in trying to show what's wrong or what's right. You're just trying to understand that person's position. And something that is very good in a lot of discussions to try and practice the listening to understand is building up the practice of either writing down what someone's saying or trying to repeat and in how you understand what that person said. So like, say I go on a 5-minute discussion, at the end you just respond with, to make sure I'm understanding you correctly, you are saying we should hold off baptizing infants because we should wait for a profession of faith based on the witness of scriptural testimony on the baptisms we see. Something like that. When you're listening to respond, you're not actually trying to understand what you're saying. This is far too common in apologetics and polemics. Joe Heschmeyer is the perfect example of someone who's constantly listening to respond rather than understand. He's had several interactions with me. One, I know I've shared several YouTube posts on different interactions, but one of them was I responded on one of his videos, and then he says, "You are saying this, how can you say this?" And it was literally the exact opposite of what I was saying. It was not at all what I said, but he was so interested in responding to what I was saying that he didn't actually try to understand what I was saying. And this has happened in several other comment sections. I've done this too. I'm not innocent of this. This is something I am actively working on, and there are days I do really good at it, and then there are days I do really bad at it. And for various reasons. But this is a skill we all need to learn to hone and practice and work on, is how to listen. And when we're listening, what is it we are listening for? Are we listening to actually understand what the other person's saying? Or are we listening to try and just end the argument and score points and get the win or victory as quickly as possible over the other person? Not that it's not important, especially in debates and dialogues over issues, to try and work towards a resolution of who is right and who is wrong. But you shouldn't start there most times. You should often start at the point of understanding, so you can then know what it is that person's saying, know their argument, and then you can go on your own and work through and figure out how it is you are going to address this issue. And sometimes it'll be really quick. Sometimes you might already know because it's something you've talked about before or discussed. Sometimes it might be something very new to you, very something most people probably haven't heard of. There was a very recent debate that came out online on whether or not Paul is a Binitarian or a Trinitarian. Most people are used to the Unitarian Trinitarian debates. This is someone who's denying that the Holy Spirit is a separate person of the Godhead, but Jesus and the Father still are. And there's various forms of Binitarianism that have existed throughout church history. There's not just one. But if I'm correct in understanding, that is this particular person's view. So most people are going to be like, what? How do you get there? Like, you won't understand it. And if you're just going to respond, you might not actually have a fruitful conversation because you're just going to talk past each other. You're just going to say things they've already addressed or that they don't believe. You need to actually understand that person in order to respond to it. There's going to be a video coming out on Javier Perdomo's channel where I've been trying to do this, and I have a very long presentation coming out. Go look on his channel for that. I've been trying to grasp the breadth of understanding around the Trinity and its clarity or obscurity in regards to the Old Testament and at times even the New Testament, and trying to grasp the different opinions that exist within Rome on that issue. And I hope I've managed to do that, but I've put about a month onto just that topic and trying to focus on it and get it. And I've read thousands of pages on that subject, and it's just attempting to grasp it. And I hope I've got it right. I definitely have this concern. I'm misunderstanding some people and getting some things wrong, but that's another part of conversation. If I have got some things wrong, you can tell me if you watch that video, and you know. And that's part of conversation. We need to be willing to accept correction when we are wrong and having an openness to that. Proverbs speaks on this matter a lot. If you want to know what scriptures to be meditating on for the subject of this video, go read Proverbs. You can read a proverb a day, and you'll get through Proverbs, not every month, but basically every month. And that's worth doing. That's a good practice. But there's many passages in there that talk about the wisdom. The wise will listen and accept critique. It will be iron as iron, and the foolish will just reject, react, and attack rather than accepting it. There's my scattered thoughts for the day. You guys have a wonderful day. God bless.